Imagine this, you and your friends are having coffee and you're discussing what it takes to be really successful in life. The mention of luck comes up, and one of the friends says, "Yes, I remember reading about luck in this book. This book was about a poker player who goes on win tournaments and talks about luck. It was very nice. Let me look it up." Don't bother looking it up. You've already lost it at that moment, because now the discussion will never reach the depth it could have otherwise, because we've gotten into this habit of looking things up every 3 seconds. On the other hand, imagine someone says, "Yes, I just finished this book. It's called The Biggest Bluff by Maria Konnikova. She takes you on this journey where she knows nothing about poker and then winning championships, and she talks about luck. She demonstrates how attention leads to luck." Believe it or not, I was that friend who would always break the flow of the discussion to look things up, because I would bring things up I've seen in a film or I've read in a book, but I would never be able to quote it, to reproduce it as I read it, and it was annoying. It was even more annoying because I was hanging out with really smart people. I've been fortunate to have very smart friends throughout my life, and why do they choose to hang out with me is one of the great mysteries of my life. But I'm very grateful to have them as friends. Now, me making this video is unbelievable, because at that time I would feel as if my brain is coated with some industrial grade Teflon. Nothing can really stick. But things have changed. Things have in fact changed a lot, and day by day that Teflon is getting melted, and believe it or not, now there is a bit of Velcro there. Things do stick there. So how does this change happen? What did I do? I will share that in this video. I will share 3 things that have played a fundamental role in moving from that Teflon coating to now a bit of Velcro. But first, let's understand, why is this important? Why is this important that you remember what you read? To remember what you read is power. It helps you become the most articulate version of yourself. You're able to see things, to connect dots, and to watch out for patterns. Let me give you an example. I was listening to a podcast by Jordan Peterson a few days ago. So when I was making note, because Jordan Peterson talks about how we can use writing to improve our thinking. And when he's talking about writing, he talks about editing, how important it is to edit and to throw away everything that doesn't make sense. As I was writing about this editing, it kind of occurred to me that it feels like I have read this somewhere. And yes, I have read something similar in this marketing book, and this is by a Canadian advertising guy, Terry O'Reilly. And Terry O'Reilly says marketing is a continuous exercise in reduction. One is a clinical psychologist and academician, and one is an advertising man and a podcaster. And their books and talks are so different, but there are common connections. It's unbelievable I was able to make that connection, and I can now read things, I can listen to them on a podcast, and I can bring them up in the discussions, and my friends have definitely noticed it. You read a book and you're like, oh, this story reminds me what I read in that book, and it's like neurons fire and all of that stuff happens, and you become smarter. So yes, definitely I can tell you from my own experience that this works. I have always been an average student. I want to make it very clear. While growing up, I hated school. I never really liked going school. Hats off to my mom who would convince me to go to school every day. And when I was at school, I was very fortunate. I used to have very, very smart friends, the class toppers. And when I moved to college and beyond, I always had very smart friends, PhD in astrophysics, statisticians, investment bankers, like really the top 1% in their field. I used to hang out with them. And I was always amazed how articulate these people were, how they can reproduce what they read. And I would just sit in a corner, just listen. And with these people, my education really started, because they would help me understand things from physics and finance, which I would understand. They will break it down in a way I would understand. And remember, this is happening when I'm in my mid-20s. That's when I'm really starting to learn. And I also tried to pick up reading a few times. However, nothing was just sticking. It was very, very frustrating. And then in my mid-30s, I got into this habit of very heavy drinking. It seems like my life was at a crossroads. I could have taken either direction. One would have definitely led me towards disaster. But I'm very lucky I chose the other one. I have made a video on how I got out of drinking. I will link that in description. If you are curious, you can check it out. Now coming back to reading, this time I had to commit, because I was committing to personal growth. And what's personal growth without reading habit? So let me share 3 things that really helped me turn things around for me. The first one, I reduced the time I spend reading on screen. When we are reading on screen, we are generally skimming, because on the internet or in our inbox, there are just so many words, and we are just trying to make sense of what we really need to understand, and then just move ahead with other tasks. So we are not really deep reading on those screens. So at that time I got Kindle. This is the same Kindle that I'm using for almost 10 years. It's built like a tank. The battery is still so good. I think possibly the best investment on personal development is a Kindle. Yes, I used to be a purist reading physical books as well, but I moved countries, and it really helps if you have Kindle. I do have a library where I have a lot of physical copies, physical books, but Kindle has been a game changer. So with Kindle, I'm changing my habit pattern of skimming, and I'm going into deep reading. The other advantage of Kindle, which is the second point in my journey, is interacting with your highlights and making notes. Yes, I never learned how to make notes when I was in school. I had no idea what making notes really is. So I'm fortunate when I started my reading in my mid-30s, and once again I was facing this problem of nothing really sticking. So nothing was sticking, and then I started looking up. A lot of people recommended this book. It's called How to Take Smart Notes. I cannot recommend this book enough. This book opened my eyes on how things really stick when you start to make notes. And then I went on to this rabbit hole of a personal knowledge management system, and I will put a link. I have a story on my blog if you are curious about my personal knowledge management. So yes, from my Kindle, all the highlights go into my note making app, which is Obsidian. In Obsidian, I have all the highlights. How did my highlights from Kindle go to my Obsidian app? That is through Readwise. I use this app called Readwise, and I can possibly cancel all my subscriptions, even Claude or Netflix or music. Everything can be cancelled, but I cannot cancel my Readwise subscription, because Readwise subscription is the tool that helps me interact with my highlights. It also has a phone app where it brings up highlights from 350 odd books that I have on my Kindle. So it's just nice to interact with them. I have not heard a single audiobook. I'll be very honest. I only read because when we read, we are putting in effort to read. And then when we engage with the highlights, we are putting in more effort. And the more the effort we put in, the higher the reward. It's that simple. And now coming to the third one. So the first one was paying attention to what you're reading, deep reading. The second one was engaging with the highlights and making notes, paying attention. And therefore the third one is meditation. I started meditation in 2019, and it has really single-handedly turned my life around. You learn how to pay attention. Otherwise, it's just theory. People say pay attention to this, pay attention to that. But how do you pay attention? That's what you learn. I'm a Vipassana meditator. I meditate 2 hours a day, and I have made other videos on my meditation practice if you are curious. Remember that cafe from the beginning of this video? I do spend a lot of time at cafe with my friends and discussions happen, but I am no longer the guy who says, let me look it up, because that in a way says you're not sure of what you are saying. To become the most articulate version of ourselves, to become thinking human beings, is a wonderful feeling. I'm not saying I'm there yet, but I am really, really way ahead from that person who has his brain coated with industrial grade Teflon. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions regarding this journey or my personal knowledge management system, please leave it in comment and I will answer it. Take care. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.